All right, guys, it's episode 57, our
57.
first November episode.
Yep.
We got an in-house guest today. It's our first in-house guest since we went to YouTube. Paul, Mr. P-Hud. He's got P-Hud's jerky.
Thank you.
Going to be starting a podcast eventually.
Eventually, yeah.
We won't say what the name of it is, but it's going to be a
Not
good one.
yet, but yeah.
Gonna be a hit. Gonna give us a run for our money.
We got a really special guest tonight and a special episode. We got an in-house guest and a special guest on Zoom. Welcome to our podcast, Mr. Paul Smith.
I'm glad to be here, guys. This is, I think, going to be a lot of fun.
Yeah.
Very interested, yeah.
Tonight we're going to be talking about remote viewing, and we're all pretty much, what would you say, novice?
Yeah, novice. I mean, I have the general idea, so I'm super,
I was gonna say
super
ignorant,
pumped.
but-
Yeah, ignorant. We're ignorant. So we're looking forward to diving into it. Remote Viewing 101 with Mr. Paul Smith. Can you give us a quick background on who you are and how you came about all this?
Yeah, quick. I don't know. There's a lot
Quick
to the
back.
story, but
Dig into it.
it'll start. Yeah, I grew up in Nevada and eventually became an Army intelligence officer. Spent 20 years in the Army, and during the course of that, I got recruited to become a psychic spy for the U.S. military. There's a discipline known as remote viewing, essentially based on extrasensory perception. And at the time I got recruited, I had never put the words remote and viewing together. I had no idea what the heck that was, right? And they recruited me, and I signed on and spent 7 years as a remote viewer and a remote viewing instructor for the Army. The whole time I was a captain in the Army. That was my job. And then from there, I went off to Desert Storm and then a more conventional intelligence career and retired in '96. And then lived in Austin, Texas for 17 years. That was pretty awesome. So now I live in Utah.
Nice. Yeah. So when they recruited you, this wasn't what you went there for. They just kind of came to you and said, "This is what we want to try," or I don't know if it was in the works. I don't know.
Yeah, I got sent to Fort Meade, Maryland after a tour with the Special Forces over in Germany. And I was working as a Mideast desk officer, so analyzing reports and sending them off to the people who needed the information. And one day they knocked on my door and said there were two folks I knew. I lived next door to one of them, across the street from the other. I had no idea they were in this program. I didn't know what they did. And they knocked on my door one day and said, "Hey, Paul, we've been watching you. We think you'd be good at what we do." And I said, "What do you do?" And they said, "We can't tell you."
What years were these about?
That was 1983. That was, in fact, the summer of 1983.
So you got voluntold?
Well, it really was a volunteer thing. They had to tell you about it, but they couldn't make you do it. And that's because of the rules on human use. You can't be forced even in the military to do something that's experimental or whatever. Right? Used to be you could, old atom bomb tests back in the 50s where they had the soldiers standing out in the open and then set off the nukes. That went really south for the military, and these days they can't make you do that, anything like that anymore. But they had me take some tests, and I apparently scored where they wanted me to, psychology tests and personality profile tests, stuff like that. And then they read me on, and I talk about it being like, it was like my Men in Black moment, where Tommy Lee Jones is reading Will Smith onto the Men in Black program, and he says, "You're going to have to sever all personal relationships. You have to, you'll be erased from the records of the country, and you have your fingertips removed," whatever it was, It was kind of like that. They invited me into their building and said, "Okay, here, sign this non-disclosure agreement," which was, I'd signed non-disclosure agreements for classified access to classified information. This was by far much more strict than any of those. In it, they said I couldn't tell anybody who didn't already know that I was in the military. I was in the Army. I'd end up wearing civilian clothes. That wasn't an agreement, but there was all kinds of things I couldn't do that I used to be able to do even with security clearance. And then they said, "Okay, well, this is what we do." After I signed that, they said, "This is what we do. We collect intelligence against foreign threats using a parapsychology discipline known as remote viewing. We essentially want you to volunteer to become a psychic spy." And so and very quickly, immediately, the guy said, "Now you don't have to give me the answer right now." He said, "You can have 24 hours to think about it, and tomorrow at this time, come in and tell me if you want to do it or not." And I said, "I don't need that. Where do I sign?" He was actually kind of surprised because everybody else they read on said, "Okay, I'll let you know tomorrow." I said, "I don't need to think about this. I want on board right now." So.
So you had no background in the parapsychology or anything remotely like that?
No, I had never had a psychic experience in my life that I could identify.
Wow.
I was interested in the field. I've often told this story, but as a kid, I loved science fiction, particularly science fiction that involved extrasensory perception, ESP. Like Andre Norton had psychic animals and stuff, people could communicate mind to mind, that kind of thing. Thought that was way cool, but I'd been on a junior high science project that totally failed. That was ESP related. Totally failed. I had been psychic as a brick, at least according to the results of that project. So I was pretty much skeptical that it really worked anymore. And yet here they are telling me there's a line item in the federal budget to train people to be psychic. There's no way I'm not going to do this.
Yeah.
Yeah. So what happened next? You went to school and they taught you everything you need to know, and
Well, yeah, metaphorically speaking, yeah, that's what they did. So they did have a training program. They people who first signed on, they did some little simple remote viewing experiments, and I did some of those. But then January, so I came on board on the 1st of September of 1983, and in January of 1984, then we went off for the serious training. We first went to SRI International, or Stanford Research International. No, Stanford Research Institute, and then it became SRI International, which is this massive think tank out in Menlo Park, California. It used to belong to Stanford University. It got spun off. It does all kinds of research for the federal government, mostly conventional stuff like nuclear weapons and communications, secure communications, that kind of stuff, plus other things as well. They also had the remote viewing program. And so we went off there and we had some training, and we kind of split our time between there, Fort Meade, and New York, because some of the training was done in New York. And, and about 18 months later, I was a professional military psychic by that time. So
now how did your very first, like, it clicked moment, like, this is real? How did that go?
Well, I sort of formed that conclusion just based on the fact that their military had a program, right? That they actually were doing this, but I didn't know I could do it at that point, right? And so they had me do my first remote viewing session probably somewhere like maybe a week after I got on board. I had to do some background reading stuff, familiarization of that before I tried it. And so that one is what we called an outbounder. And how that works is the remote viewer and a monitor or an interviewer, another person, sit in a room that's sealed, sensorially sealed. So there's no windows, it's soundproof, it's all that stuff, right? And so you're in there. And then meantime, there's another group of people, usually two, that are randomly given a target to go to. They physically go there. And they go to the target. And then the idea is the remote viewer, who knows who the people are, doesn't know where they went. So then they psychically, for use of a better word, psychically find these people using projected consciousness or whatever. They find these people, and and then when you find the people, then you perceive where they are. The goal is to perceive the location that they're at. It's not telepathy. Some people think you're reading their mind about what they're there. You're not seeing through their eyes. They're just a kind of a signpost, like here we are, this is where the target is, and then you find them, you find the target, right? So they say again,
like an antenna, sort of.
Yeah, like an antenna or a beacon. We call it beacon as well. So it serves a beacon. So the target that was picked, I found out later, was this huge water tower, the central pedestal, big bulge on the top, all these pipes coming down. The thing was probably 50 feet high, maybe, I don't know, 7,500 feet across. It's huge. Painted this really noticeable blue color. Meanwhile, I'm sitting there in the room and I'm getting the inside of a building. The walls are kind of an off-white matte kind of texture windows have these little lacy curtains in them. There's little kind of tea table things around. Some kind of business establishment. There's this feature on one side that has a big square in it, and there's glass, and behind her these little things. So I'm reporting all this stuff and drawing sketches of the inside of this place, and the guy I'm working with, I think him thinking, I don't think we have a target like that in our target set. What's going on here, right? So they come back and you bring in a bag of donuts and stuff for us to snack on, and then we get in the car, and part of the outbounder is you go back to the location with the viewer, and then the viewer gets to see what it is that he or she was supposed to have perceived, right? We get back there, I'm looking at this massive water tower, I'm thinking, I didn't get anything like this, nothing. I'm a failure. They're going to fire me 4 days after I've been hired, total failure. So we're driving back down the road eating the donuts, and all of a sudden I see something off to the side, and I say, wait, what's that? And I point over there, and my monitor, who is the training officer, who'd figured it out by then, he says, it doesn't matter what you get instead if you don't get the target. What are you talking about? I want to go over there anyway. So we go over there, we go inside, and here's this room with this off-white matte walls and lacy curtains in the windows and little tea tables scattered around, and a counter there, and behind the glass is a whole bunch of donuts. So what had happened was the outbound team on their way back had done something they shouldn't have ought to done. They stopped at the donut shop and got donuts and brought them back. And I picked up on the donut shop and not the intended target. They should have just gone to the target and come back, and I would have had a much better chance of doing that.
So they almost.
So go ahead.
So for what are the people called that are going, like your beacons? What are they called?
Yeah, outbound team or the beacon team.
You're almost someone like your outbound team almost needs to like have a bag over their head, until they get to the location, so that they don't, pick up any stray, info.
Yeah. Well, I've done a million of these things since for other people, right? And the protocol, which they didn't really, it was a little sloppy the way they did it. First of all, if they'd gone straight and come back, it probably would have worked out okay. But the protocol usually is you don't start viewing until the team actually goes into the target area. And then you stop as they're coming out. You usually set about a 15-minute time span. So at 13:45 in the afternoon, the team walks in. At 1400, the team walks out. And only during that 15-minute period are you supposed to be remote viewing. That's not how they did that, but I'm very careful after that experience. I'm very careful to do it properly now so that people don't have that same problem.
Yeah, that is interesting. I can't believe you picked up on that. I can't fathom it myself.
Well, it could be disastrous if they stopped off at their girlfriend's house instead of the donut shop.
That could have been awkward. Yeah. That was my father-in-law said. This is written up in my first book. I wrote that story in my first book, and my father-in-law read the book and he said, trust you to go for the donuts instead of the water tower.
I don't blame you.
Yeah, that's fun.
Yeah.
So what's a more serious, like the CIA, I'm assuming, has put you on targets and things like that, and I mean, have you done like murder cases and sorts of things?
Well, so I'll tell you that. First off, be aware that even though it's called the CIA Stargate program, that's the formal name for it, the CIA never actually ran the program. It was started at SRI as a scientific experiment. The CIA did fund it for 3 years. They did give them a contract to research it. But in 1975, the CIA got out of it. The Air Force took the program over and did some work with it. And then the Army took the program over. And then the Defense Intelligence Agency took the program over. So we're going up an echelon as we go, right? And then at the end, the DIA, the Defense Intelligence Agency, was kind of mishandling it. And so Congress decided they were going to pass it on to the CIA. The problem was the CIA was led at that time by John Deutsch, who was he was famous for not wanting to have anything to do with remote viewing. Anytime anybody tried to give him a briefing on the program, whatever, he just kicked him out of the office. He said, I don't have time for that crap. He didn't want to have anything to do with remote viewing. And so here is Congress giving the program to CIA, who doesn't want it. And so the day that the transfer occurred from DIA to the CIA also closed the program down. It never actually ran the program. But because it was given proponency from it by Congress, it became known as the CIA's program.
Okay, yeah, that clears some things up. Okay.
Yeah.
Interesting. This is fun.
Yeah. So when you mentioned not, it's not like telepathy, or you're not, reading minds, or actually seeing through someone's eyes like they're a camera, that's definitely what I was thinking about when you're talking about the remote viewing. So can you describe what it's like, when you're sensing what's around the beacons, or the outbound team, or whatever it was?
Well, I think I'll actually skip the beacons now and go to the stuff that we really did the most of. So obviously, if you have a denied facility in the Soviet Union and you need a beacon to get in there, if a beacon to remote view it, you'd have to get somebody in that building. And if you can get somebody in that building, you just give them a camera, forget about
You don't need a remote viewer. They can describe what they saw.
Yeah. So we were used for things they couldn't get access to. And we used to start off with a thing called, well, there's lots of approaches, but one was coordinate remote viewing, which we now call controlled remote viewing. What you do is you give the viewer, way back then, we'd give them latitude and longitude. The viewer would home in on that, and then they start reporting what was at that location. Okay. So the kinds of targets we were asked to do, it varied over the career of the program, but largely it was Soviet and Chinese R&D facilities, what their latest weapon systems were, what they were up to, facilities out in the middle of Siberia that we couldn't get anybody into, and satellite photos only showed us the roof of it. We didn't know what was in there. We might have remote viewers go into that. So an example here might be, let's say there was a facility out there, and the CIA, we did get tasked by the CIA off and on, but lots of other intelligence agencies as well. So let's say, in this case, the CIA wanted to know what was going on in that building, and they had maybe, I don't know, let's say 3 hypotheses. So the first one is they're developing the latest new main battle tank, or they're working on ballistic missile development, or it's a chemical biological warfare facility. And they don't know which one it is. They know it's one of those, but they don't know which one it is. So then you might task a remote viewer to project his or her consciousness there, and they would go inside the building, of course it's figurative, right? Go inside the building consciously and start reporting things like, well, there's these big vats that are full of this green viscous liquid that is intended to be released and harm people. Well, they can discount the main battle tank, they can discount the ballistic missile. Now they know it's a biological chemical warfare facility of some kind, maybe a laboratory. So that might be a really rough example of how we might be used.
Now, how much value does say your word hold? Would say it is a biological warfare, something that's really against the rules of warfare. Like if you told them that's in there, can they go in there and shut that down? Well,
if the Soviets were doing it, we couldn't directly shut it down. But what would happen is that not only works as identifying what's going on, but it's a kind of a tip-off mechanism. And then it tells the CIA, in this case, for example, what to look for to corroborate that it really is that. So instead of looking for mechanical parts, they might start looking at the flow of different chemical precursors and stuff, right? So then they develop hard intelligence. They can go to complain to the UN about it or whatever, or
right.
Or you're violating this treaty, and if you don't get back in compliance, then we'll just get out of that treaty, and then you're going to be in real trouble, right? So that's kind of roughly how this could operate.
Super interesting. I'm also kind of curious, does this tie into different religious backgrounds, things like that?
Yeah, I was curious about that too.
Well, it's interesting. In the program, we had a number of different people believe a number of different things. So we had some Catholics. We had an atheist or two. Well, no, we didn't have any atheists. It's really hard to be an atheist when this happened, when this kind of stuff is working, right? So I was a Mormon. We had several Mormons in there, and so we had a wide variety. We had some Protestants, no evangelicals. We did have an evangelical secretary, and it freaked her out so bad that she has to be transferred somewhere else. But she was a nice lady, but she just couldn't handle this weird stuff, So it's kind of religion independent. It's even metaphysics independent in a way. So You get a lot of psychics, so to speak, who, they appeal to their spirit guides, or they channel some long dead entity or whatever, and then that's how they get their information, as they say it. And remote viewing is based on the premise that everybody has this ability, that we all have the ability to non-locally be aware of things in the universe. And the research bears this out, by the way. And you don't need any kind of an entity. You don't need any particular religious belief. You don't need any particular anything. You just have to do what it takes to do it. And you succeed no matter what you actually believe about what makes the universe up. So that's one of the beauties of it, is you avoid all this kind of cultural, metaphysical, mystical baggage that so many of these other modalities have. You don't have to believe any of that stuff. This just works independently of that. It's just a feature of human nature that mainstream science really doesn't accept or believe in, and yet we have the evidence that actually works. So
is it a spiritual component of who we are, or you think, or you don't really say it's a spiritual, non-spiritual, it's just like having an arm or a leg, it's just a part of who we are, and it's not spiritual?
Well, it's more like having cognition rather than a limb, right? But so in the basic nature, if you ask me personally, I'd say it's spiritual. But from a professional perspective, I'd say you don't have to have any conception of spirit or anything like that for it to work. Now, you have to, so there's got to be some explanation. Some people think, well, it's just an innate thing of human nature that doesn't require any kind of spirit or anything. And I say, well, I believe that we have spirit. And so that's my explanation, but I don't insist that anybody else accept that, just as long as they understand this really does work, no matter what mechanism you attribute to it.
Right.
So you can pretty much remote view to anywhere you want? I mean,
in principle, you can. Yes, in principle, you can. Practically, you can't. So in principle, you can remote view anything. Practically, it's hard. So for example, it's easy to remote view the Eiffel Tower. It's a lot harder to remote view the digital footprint of a bank account, right? Because that's just not anything that's really concrete. Concrete things are easier to do. You can pick up on stuff that isn't concrete to some degree, but it's much more complicated, and it takes a lot more experience before you actually can feel confident that you're succeeding. I should tell you up front, because this is something people don't understand. The viewer can't know what the target is. So in other words, I couldn't just say one day, well, I'm interested in seeing what's on the dark side of the moon, and project my consciousness over there and see what's on the dark side of the moon. Like, I have to be blind to the target. And there's a really good reason for this. That's because if you know what the target is before you do it, then everything you think about the target, everything you believe about the target, anything you could guess about the target would be right there in your head.
preconceived
And it
ideas.
would, say again?
Preconceived ideas, or
Yes.
yeah,
That's really
Preconceived ideas, and that can blanket the really relatively subtle signal that's coming in, so that you can't pick up the stuff that you need to pick up because you're so busy with all this other crap that that's already there. And so viewers have to be blind to the target, and so oftentimes I'll be asked, well, can I remote view what my girlfriend is up to? I'll say no. You could, but you really wouldn't get anything. It'd be all your imagination is the only thing you'd be getting in that circumstance.
So you said before, okay, so that makes me, it's a good question I have then, or I hope it's a good question. So you mentioned before about the Soviet business, you were given what you said, longitude and latitude coordinates.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So I guess you just looked at it on a map, or no? Okay,
No.
so if you're blind to the target, that's what before you said that, I was thinking, okay, so then I could just tell you, hey, why don't you, let me give you my address, 123 Easy Street, and, tell me what the inside of my living room looks like,
Yeah.
You can do that, or you can't do that,
Oh,
or?
in principle, you could do that, because by giving me your address, you give me an address, right? My subconscious can locate that and guide my conscious awareness to it. It's not really a good test, because the problem is everybody knows what a living room looks like. And even though yours might be different in certain ways, because I would know that it was a living room and I know it's a residence. Then all the stuff that I know about living rooms would be there fighting.
Well,
for
right.
range.
You know, I'm a white
Yeah.
guy, you know, I live in Louisiana,
Yeah.
so yeah, there's certain things that are going to come into play. So
Yeah.
I guess, I don't know. So, if the CIA came to you, which is interesting that the CIA would ask you to do anything since they didn't want to pay for the program.
Yeah. Well, that was before that guy was in charge.
Oh,
So
okay.
we had a number of, I think I figured out we had 38 different intelligence entities who tasked us at one time or another. And that included the Secret Service, ITAC, which is the Intelligence Threat and Analysis Center, belongs to the Army, Air Force Intelligence, CIA, DIA. Let me think of some of the Department of Trade. Well, no, not the Department of Trade. State Department tasked us on some stuff. All of these guys have intelligence agencies, and at one time or another, they tasked us. So
if you can't know the target, so say the CIA is interested in knowing what's, at my address,
yeah.
you can't know the target, do they just all strictly just give you GPS coordinates? I mean,
Well, how it
Are
works
they-
now.
Hmm?
Yeah. So we always had a layer between the viewers and the taskers or the requester, right? So let's keep using the CIA because that's easy, right? So let's
That's
say
more
the
fun,
CIA.
too,
Yeah, that's right.
golly,
So the CIA wouldn't come to the viewer. The CIA would come to the boss, the commander of the unit, and say, we need a project done. And they might even tell that person what the project is. And then we'd have a project manager who would then be responsible for 3 or 4 viewers. The project manager would, in the best circumstance, would be just given the coordinate and might even be told the kind of information we were looking for. And then that information then would be passed down to what we called monitors, the person that worked with the viewer. The monitor would be blind, because you don't want anybody working with the viewer to know what the target is. Now, I'm speaking really roughly. There were probably times when the monitor did know, or at least knew something about it, but it all depended on the project. Generally speaking, the ideal circumstances, the monitor is blind as well. So it brings in the coordinate, and I'll explain a little more about that in a minute. It brings in the coordinate, gives it the viewer, and then essentially monitors the viewer to make sure the viewer stays on track with the process you're supposed to use in the remote viewing setting. They're sort of a guide in a way. It's one of those blind leading the blind, obviously, but they know how the viewer is supposed to be behaving. And if the viewer starts like doing something wrong, then the monitor said, well, that's not how you're supposed to do it, so to speak, right? So anyway, and then the viewer does the session, gives the results to the monitor takes it to the project manager, and then it might get looked over at that point, or it might be sent up for the change to the consumer, who then analyze it compared to all the other data that they have. So that way the viewer can stay blind and still do the job that's required of them. Now, I talked about geographic coordinates later on, and this will blow your mind. We didn't use those anymore. We used what we called encrypted coordinates, but weren't really. They were essentially an arbitrary number. So for example, let's say I'm doing a training session with one of you guys, and I say, okay, I'm thinking, well, I think I'm going to have them do remote view the Eiffel Tower today and see how well they do that. So I would, on a piece of paper, as an example, write down an arbitrary number. And the one I always like to use is 8675309. So 8675309 equals remote view the Eiffel Tower. Okay. So then I figuratively will say, I'll tear the paper in half, and I won't give the viewer a remote view the Eiffel Tower part of it. I'll give them the 8675309 part, and then they go through the process, and their subconscious goes out into the universe. This is hand wavy, right? Goes out into the universe, finds what that number is connected to, realizes, oh, they want me to remote view the Eiffel Tower. Subconscious then guides the viewer's attention to the Eiffel Tower, and then the viewer starts providing information, sketching, that kind of thing, to come up with a result in the end.
So it's like the picture was on the same piece of paper as the number, which kind of associates, like, that's your clue, like, this is okay, take this lead and go from there.
Yeah, it would work. I usually use verbiage though, because I don't want them remote viewing a picture of the Eiffel Tower. I want them remote viewing the actual Eiffel Tower. So
Interesting.
So these guys are probably too young to know what the heck you were talking about with that.
you think so?
I know
867.
the song. I can't think of who sang it.
Okay, so yeah, you know the song. Did you?
Tommy Two Tone.
Yeah, I wouldn't have got
It
that.
was the only song that made him famous.
Yeah. One hit wonder.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
This is interesting. Kind of off top. I'm sorry. Do you have a question first? I'm gonna go off topic with
Okay.
you. So if you have another one
well,
of those.
so I guess two questions. So one, how can you defend against it if you don't want somebody peeping in your business?
You can't.
And then two, if I guess what level of accuracy or detail can you get to? Because if it's, again, this is my first
Yeah.
go around with this, so I only know what you've told me, and then my just natural skepticism when I've heard of it before. I went, yeah, okay, yeah, that's funny, that's cute. So if it is that effective, then why wouldn't we be able to do a whole lot? I guess why wouldn't we be able to look and see what's on Kim Jong-un's desk, or see
Yeah.
what's going on in China for the Kung flu, what really happened, or whatever secrets we need access to, and then obviously how would you defend against it?
So first question, how you defend against it? You shoot the viewer,
Okay, that seems effective.
which is one of the reasons why it was so highly classified, is they were protecting the viewers, right? We didn't know that the Russians would come over here and try and take them out if they knew about it, but they have had a history of doing things like that.
Yeah.
So one of the reasons for the high security level of it was protection for the sources, right? Other than that, there's no real way of defending against it that they've ever found. So that's the problem.
Wow.
Okay, so the next question was essentially what level of detail. I think you asked that, right?
Yeah, right. So if we're wanting to know about that program, that so-and-so is running over there, why couldn't we remote view what's on the guy's desk, or pick through the filing cabinet or something?
So yes, and you can get up to that level of detail with remote viewing. Not every remote viewing session is going to be that good. Most of them won't be, but some of them will be, and sometimes it doesn't even work. So generally the rough estimate I give is about 70% of the time the remote viewer will produce evidence that they are on target. They will produce evidence, the information that they could not have gotten in any other way. And then half of that, so we're saying roughly 35% of the time, the session will be high quality, okay? And between that, it'll vary all over the spectrum, high quality, low quality, depending on, we don't know what it depends on, right? Since we don't know the causal story, we know what the original stimulus is. It's, I don't know, the chemical factory in Russia, right? And we know what the end result is, the remote viewer making a sketch of it and everything, and describing it. But we don't know that middle chunk, from how that information is then got to the viewer for the viewer to perceive. We don't know that part. And so we can't predict when any given remote viewing session is going to work. We can't predict how well it'll work, but generally speaking, in very rough statistics, 70% of the time there's some success, 35% of the time it's really high success. Okay, so one example of this is one of the very early remote viewers who was really amazing. His name was Pat Price. The CIA actually hired him away from SRI. And they asked him to remote view the new, let's see, let me see if it's been a while since I told the story, so I make sure I get it right. Remote view, I think the then existent US embassy in Moscow, and to find see if there were any bugs. And so and they actually had, the guy who did it was Joe McMoneagle, who's a legend in the remote. I'm sorry, no, this is Pat Price. What am I saying? Getting my stories mixed up. And it's not even that late here. Wow. So anyway, they're wanting to remote view so the American embassy, and on hand, not in the session, but on hand, listening to him work, was a tech sweep guy who had actually been to that embassy and gone through it trying to find bugs. And Price proceeded to identify locations of bugs the Soviets had planted. And he started off first by describing the code room of the embassy. And this guy says, has he been there? Has he ever been there? That's exactly where I was a week ago, you know? So then he actually pinpointed locations where the tech folks went back in and found bugs where he pinpointed them. So that's precision. Yeah, that's precision. Now,
Right.
they aren't all that good, but there's a number of cases where it's been that good. So
You mentioned the statistics on accuracy and stuff like that. It seems like, using our example of the chemical vats, blah, 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 in Russia, it seems like to get the statistics that you're talking about, a lot of times you're going to have no idea. It's just like you said, it's going to be like, well, he described vats. Okay, so we know it's not missiles. We know it's not tanks. It must be chemical. So it gives you a place to work from. But
yeah,
there's going to be a long lag, I guess, until you can finally get some humans in there to verify that that's what's really going on.
if you ever did, yeah. And so those statistics, when I tell you those statistics, those are my rough seat of the pants estimates.
Right, because it could be
So-
easily higher or lower, you know.
Yes, but they're based not on operational work, which we may or may not have gotten feedback on. That's generally based on my experience in the training world, where
Okay.
I'm working with people where we do have feedback and stuff. So again, that's a rough estimate. What the statistics are on the success rate in an operational setting, I don't know. It's really almost anecdotal, because there's no way of doing statistics on that, because you don't get results that every one of them do, right? So all I can do is tell you successes and failures in the operational world. I can't actually give you strong, well, I take that back. There's one case where we do have statistics on that, but it's a kind of a limited set scenario. So for all of 1989, we were detailed back to the Army from DIA to work the counter-narcotics problem with the joint task forces around the U.S. You know, JTF-4 in the Caribbean, JTF-6, I think, was the West Coast, maybe JTF-5, and I think it was in El Paso. So, you know, we were detailed to work with them. We actually went on site to Key West to do some of these. And we went on site out to Alameda Air Station in California to work down in Long Beach and stuff. It was really quite fun, actually.
Yeah, I was going to
You know,
say Key West and Palm Beach. I mean, whatever you just said, Long Beach would
Long
be
Beach,
excellent
yeah.
locations to
Yeah,
to
it
work.
was great. It was great. But so we let's see, let me think if I get the numbers right. So roughly, the remote viewers were tasked on roughly 100 projects trying to locate. So they might be trying to locate hidden compartments where narcotics were being smuggled on ships, or what containers they were in. They might be tasked to locate transshipment points, meetings of drug traffickers, hidden location on islands, all that kind of stuff, right? So we worked about 100 of those, but they were only able to evaluate about a third. So a few over 30, because they themselves, the Coast Guard and the Navy and those guys, didn't have enough assets to address all of the things that we could remote view. So they had a set of roughly 30 some odd. And they were able to analyze those very carefully. And so the results were this, that in roughly a third of the cases, our results gave them there was nothing useful in the stuff that we produced for them. Roughly a third of the cases was mixed. Some of the information we provided was accurate. Some of the information wasn't. In 30% roughly of the cases, they rated us as very successful. That in fact, as one of the Army colonels that was involved with it said to us, he said, I can guarantee that narco traffickers were captured and contraband was recovered solely based on the information, on the remote viewing information. So not even mixed with any of the other intelligence data. And their final analysis was this. So there are four intelligence disciplines, or INTs, involved here. One was, of course, the obvious one would be human intelligence, informants, you know, that kind of thing. Signals intelligence and imagery intelligence. So imagery from aerial platforms, satellites, and reconnaissance aircraft and stuff. And I'm only giving you off the top of my head, but roughly the signals intelligence was the poorest intelligence source, which makes sense.
Yeah.
Because
It's electronic.
unless you're lucky, you're not going to pick up on a radio transmission from a narco trafficker, right?
Yeah.
This was back before cell phones were prominent. These days, the signals intelligence might be more useful. But back then, signals intelligence was, I want to say, roughly 5% successful, something like that. I do have the figures in my record somewhere. Imagery intelligence, aerial reconnaissance, was roughly 9% successful. And of course, the gold standard is the human intelligence, and they were 15% successful. Rated on the stuff we did, we were 30% successful. So that's pretty darn impressive when you get right down to it.
Yeah.
Right? Pretty darn impressive. Even though we had lots of failures, so did all the other intelligence disciplines. So.
Yeah, I mean, given the situation, like this is coming out of your mind, you know, this isn't like cold hard facts. It's hard to, that's a good success rate considering this is something that's, you know, it's an oddity, honestly. It's kind of odd to me. So yeah, very impressive.
Yeah, and a lot of people in the military just didn't want to believe it. They didn't want to have anything to do with it. And so it did have a checkered history, people trying to kill it, people trying to boost it up, other people trying to kill it, other people trying to boost it up, you know.
Right, absolutely.
Is there any like knowledge of other countries using this kind of a program?
Well, we knew the Russians were doing it, well, when there was the Soviets. And that's why the US got into it, is because we had gotten a lot of intelligence that the Soviets were actually spending hundreds of millions of dollars in this kind of research for apparently defense purposes. Now, that's hundreds of millions of dollars, not rubles, right?
Jeez.
People like to make fun of the US government. Well, they spent $20 million on psychics. Well, that was less than 10% of what the Russians were spending on psychics.
Right.
So, you know, the CIA realized that the Russians are spending that kind of money on something, they must really think there's something to it.
Yeah.
And so that's why we got into it. They wanted to check that out. And it turned out that it was actually viable. You know?
Yeah, absolutely worth a shot. I mean, it's obviously working, so.
Yeah. Now, I think they're out of it now, but there's some suspicion the Chinese might be involved in it. I mean, again, you know, no country's going to admit it if they're using it in their defense establishment.
No.
So we don't know for sure, but there's suspicion the Chinese may have a program. The Israelis actually were interested in it, although it's been 20 years since I heard they were doing anything else, but they were interested in it for a while. It may still be, I don't know. The Brits actually played around with it, but there was kind of a low scale, not particularly serious kind of an effort. Other people, I don't know, couldn't tell you.
It'd be surprising that they're not still doing it if it was yielding those results, you know?
Well, the thing you have to remember, there's two variables here. One is that it doesn't work all the time. Now, everybody knows intelligence doesn't work all the time, but when you get something as controversial as this, the expectation is if it doesn't work all the time, then why have anything to do with it, right?
Yeah.
And that was kind of the attitude of a lot of people in the U.S. military establishment back about the time the program was canceled is, well, we can't count on it being right, so why should we do it? It's a stupid argument, but they were already biased against it anyway, you know.
It just seems like
They're already biased against it anyway.
yeah, just another quiver, another arrow in your quiver, you know? I mean, just another tool in your, whatever. I don't know. Let me kill the analogies there, but
Well, and then the bias accounts for the rest of it. That there were a lot of people who didn't want to have anything to do with it. You know, they just thought it was too weird. The government ought to be doing that stuff. I don't care if it does work. They shouldn't ought to be doing that stuff. You know, kind of that kind of approach.
I have kind of an off-topic question here. Do you relate this in any way to like a dream, like to dreams or to deja vu, things like that? I mean, is it relatable at all? Any of this?
Well, who really knows about deja vu? There's a plausible scientific explanation for it. Whether it's the real explanation, nobody knows, but there's a plausible scientific explanation for it. So I actually am not inclined to think that deja vu is an ESP-based thing. But in terms of dream states, there is a long history of anecdotal evidence and some experimental evidence in recent years that you can have people who experience ESP in dreams. There's some really clever kind of experiments that have been developed that show people being successful in some kind of ESP-based experiment while they're asleep and dreaming. But generally speaking, in most cases, remote viewing is done with the person awake and conscious.
Right.
I'm not sure that was the rest of your question. I kind of lost track of.
Well, I was just kind of thinking of like lucid dreaming, you fall asleep,
Oh,
you can control your dream, you can, do what you want to do,
Yeah.
and then that's not real, but I mean, you could do what you want to do. Maybe you
Yeah.
can see what you want to see type thing. I just thought,
Yeah, so there have been actually some research in the program, in the Stargate program, some research using lucid dreaming to see if it could enhance the psi effect or whatever. I don't think the results are very promising. I can't say there wasn't any effect there, because it's been a long time since I looked at that stuff. But I do know that they kind of abandoned it because it didn't seem to be working very well for them. So
yeah. And this stuff has got to go pretty far back. I'm sure there's some history back ancient times where he was just the medicine man or whatever, but it's got to go way back.
Hey, the first ever remote viewing session was done by the Oracle at Delphi at the request of King Croesus of Greece. Well, not Greece, Macedonia, one of those places. This is Herodotus actually wrote this story up, and it was a classic outbound remote viewing event where the king wanted to test the oracles. Maybe you've heard this story. He wanted to test the oracles to see which one worked. I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, I haven't heard the story.
Oh, okay. Yeah, so he wanted to test them, and so he sent messengers to all the oracles and said, the king's going to be doing something on a certain day. I want you to tell me what you perceive as him doing on that day. And all of them but the Oracle of Delphi came up with some story that seemed appropriate to kings. Their imagination was kicking in, like I told you, right?
Mm-hmm.
The Oracle of Delphi essentially said, well, I'm really paraphrasing here, right? He said, well, he's dressed in loincloth cooking turtle soup in the shell of a turtle with cooking turtle soup in a brass container with a lid or something like that.
Wow.
And in fact, that's exactly what he was doing. He wanted to do something that he didn't expect that an oracle could just randomly guess by the fact that he was a king.
Wow.
And that's a classic outbound or remote viewing session. So that was, I don't know, 600 BC, something like that. So
that's awesome.
Yeah,
That is
that's
awesome. I love ancient history.
Safe to say the Oracle kept his or her job.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Kept their head, maybe.
Kept their head.
Well, there's a sad ending to that story because Croesus decided, well, the oracle knows what she's talking about, but the oracle always talked in verse, right? So he said, well, I'm planning on staging an invasion against, I don't know, the Persians or somebody, and how's that going to turn out? And the oracle said this kind of poem about one empire being destroyed and the other one being ascended, and he interpreted it wrong. He assumed that meant that he was going to win and the Persians were going to lose, but it ended up being her oracle was absolutely correct, but it ended up being just the opposite of how the king interpreted it. So it was depressing.
Ouch.
That is interesting. I like this stuff. I kind of want to give it a shot. I mean, worth a shot. Why not, right? I mean, if anybody,
sometime we could do that. It'll take a little prep to make sure we did it right, but we could maybe sometime downstream when we want to do it, we can try it.
Yeah.
I'm curious about learning a little more about it. I still feel like there's a religious tie-in or a spiritual tie-in, but
Well, there might be, and from my perspective, there is, but I don't insist that anybody else believe my.
well, what is
version.
what is your
Wait, before we go into that, let's take a quick break and we'll jump into that because that's a deep.
Okay.
Quick intermission here.
Be sure to check out Paul H. Smith's book, The Essential Guide to Remote Viewing, available at all bookstores and Amazon.
All right, we're back from that quick break. P-Hud, continue with your question, please.
Yeah, I was just curious about the spiritual aspect. I just, you said that it doesn't necessarily have to be, and other people don't think it is, or people do, but you kind of, I feel like there's a spiritual component to it. You said you did too, even though you don't necessarily have to acknowledge that to work it. I'm curious what your personal belief was and, how this was connected spiritually.
Well, in order to respond to that question, I have to acknowledge that my version of it, my opinion of it, is based somewhat on Mormon theology, right? So Mormons believe that that the innate part of us, our innate identity, didn't just come into existence when we were born, but we've existed forever, right? As some kind of intelligent entity of some sort, right? And we get incarnated into this life, into our bodies, and then we continue on through mortality. But you could call this aspect spirit, that we each have an identifiable spirit, that is our identity. They're discrete, particulate spirits. So spirits in what we call pre-existence had the ability to communicate without having any physical attributes. They had the ability to move around without having any physical body. They had the ability to know things without, having the brain and all that stuff going on. When you think about that, all that sounds like ESP, doesn't it? Essentially, telepathy, clairvoyance, all that stuff. And so we get born into this life, and our bodies and our spirits in some way are connected. And we get this kind of amnesia in the process. So we don't remember any of that before. What I think happens when we're doing this is that we essentially are vaguely learning, as we do remote viewing and learn this kind of stuff, what we used to be able to do really easily in the past. We didn't lose those abilities, we just lost the memory of them. And so essentially what we're doing is activating, if you will, some of our spiritual abilities that we used to have, just didn't remember that we had when we learned remote viewing. Now the other side of that is we have all these physical abilities, and we can use them for good or we can use them for bad. We can rescue a child who's drowning, or we can rob a bank, right, with our physical powers. I think that we can do the same thing with these spiritual powers, which is why the Russians could have remote viewers, and we could as well, so to speak, if you want to draw in black and white there. And so that's a very down and dirty kind of version of my explanation about it. So I don't know if that rings true.
Yeah, no, that answers my question, and it gave me about 9 other questions that I'm not going to jump into, because that'll be a whole nother rabbit hole to go down in a whole nother episode, because it kind of parts of what you said are threw back to when we had the episode about the Anunnaki, and then when I talked about some of that, and that the pre-spirit just we live in a spiritual world basically, in short, and that most of the time the dumb monkeys that live here just ignore it and pretend like that doesn't exist, but
and at any one time or another, every one of us can be a dumb monkey.
Oh, we're all dumb monkeys. Some of us maybe a little less dumb than others, But my final question was, has there been any testing done, I guess, because, you mentioned, again, I'm coming at this from, I know what you have talked about today. I don't really have any other, information, but I'm just wondering if this has been, it seems like this would be right for some sort of, kind of scientific, well, you already mentioned some of this is double blind anyway, some kind of testing just to do, I'm not sure why it wouldn't have been done to prove it, better, and then it could be, used more,
Yeah. So the remote viewing program actually consisted of 2 wings. The one was the military wing, where we did actual operational remote viewing and some experimentation. The other wing was at SRI, and ultimately ended up SAIC, but most of the time it was at SRI, where they did a lot of basic research on it. And so, yes, there were literally thousands of remote viewing sessions done, hundreds of research projects done, a number of which have actually been published in peer-reviewed literature, like in Nature and the IEEE, the Institute of Electrical Engineers publications. I'm blanking right now. Science actually had some articles on it, and so on. So there's a lot of research. I have a book. I'm going to plug my book just for a second. It's called The Essential Guide to Remote Viewing. Okay. And
where's the best place to get that book? We're gonna get it.
Oh, probably Amazon. I mean, if people want to buy it from the book website, okay. I send them a signed copy, but it's quicker off of Amazon. I send it media mail, and it takes a while, but quicker off of Amazon. So in this book, I talk a lot about the evidence for it. I show anecdotal evidence where you actually show remote viewing sessions in comparison to the results. But I also talk about the statistics. I mean, they literally did thousands. In 1988, the guy who was directing the program at the time, a physicist named Ed May, was required by an oversight committee of Congress to produce, to collect and summarize all of the research data that had been done up through 1987 in the program. So between 1973 and 1987, to capture all of that data and give them a summary analysis of that. And he found somewhere in the neighborhood of 25,000 remote viewing experimental sessions that they had done. And he gave the statistics. So they're able to evaluate those using a statistical analysis, gave statistics that were roughly 1 in a trillion chance of it being by accident. And so essentially, by scientific standards, that evidence is airtight, that it really did work, right?
Well, it's
So
crazy.
and that's just the start. There's tons of research in it. Go ahead, sorry.
No, it just seems it's crazy then that he just didn't basically tell those other people to, here's the statistics, shove it.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, it works.
Well, trust me, we have done that over and over and over again. It's available. We've published stuff. When I say we, me, and a lot of the scientists and stuff involved, we've published the stuff. It's on the internet. It's available. I should tell you about the huge fight I had with Wikipedia on the remote viewing page. It's run by skeptics. The remote viewing page is overrun by skeptics. They posted and they said, well, nobody's posted any peer-reviewed evidence that this works. And so I posted about 20, bibliographical links, 20 studies that have been done and published in peer-reviewed journals. And then the editors there, the skeptical editors, pulled it all down and said, well, that's all stuff by proponents. That doesn't count.
So, well, before we started this, I actually pulled up the Wikipedia thing, and I read about a paragraph before I decided I didn't want to know anything. I just wanted to talk to you clean. But like the third line in that whole thing is, there is no scientific evidence that it works. So I mean, so like, not like they're putting their opinion right up front.
That's right. It's totally false. That statement is totally false. There's a ton of it.
Right. I have one final question. Also kind of off the rails as I like to go. I'm assuming when you do
Hey,
experiments.
you're from Wyoming. You're entitled.
Yeah.
The whole
That's
place
why
is
there's only a
off the
couple of
rails.
us out there.
There's only a couple rails out there anyway.
That's right.
When doing experimental studies, you have to cover all odds, correct? You got to cover your sleep, sensory deprivation, maybe overstimulation of sensory, all these sorts of things. What do you think about psychedelics, things like that? Do you think that would be worse? Maybe, not saying that you had any part of these studies, just kind of curious what your thoughts on it.
Enhanced.
That's an interesting question, because here on my desk, and I haven't had time to read it, I have an article on psychedelics and remote viewing.
Oh, wow.
Interesting.
So did you look at that before this?
It's in my head. I seen it.
You should have covered that up before we started this, because I think you took
I should have. He saw it. So one of the questions they ask is, when at SRI in their research, did they ever experiment with controlled substances to see what impact it would have on the process? And the guy who was the head of it, who started the program, his name was Hal Puthoff. He's not a nuclear physicist. He was a laser physicist. He said no, and there was two reasons. One was because if they ever got caught doing that stuff, it was the government-funded operation, right? If they got caught doing that stuff, they would lose their contract. But he says the other thing is, here's the problem with controlled substances, and I'll go through a few of them. So if you do alcohol, the problem with alcohol is, of course, it's a central nervous system depressant, and it's kind of it makes you cognitively decoherent to some degree, right? That's not good for remote viewing. Right? So alcohol is kind of out of it. I do know some people who might get a light buzz on and seem to do okay, right? But still, it doesn't seem like a good choice. But let's get into psychedelics. And here's the problem with that, is going just by kind of stereotypical LSD event, where you take LSD and you get all this imagery. It's just really wild imagery oftentimes, and just crazy kind of stuff. And the problem is, and are reports that in fact psychoactive substances sometimes do enhance ESP, but the problem is they also enhance the mental noise.
Right.
And so you end up with all this imagery and stuff that may not actually have anything to do with the target, but it's there competing with what it is you're trying to perceive. And that can actually cause more trouble than it solves. And it turns out it seems to be best just to do it stone cold sober. Caffeine may help. Caffeine may help because it is, of course, a central nervous system stimulant. It's possible nicotine does too, but I wouldn't want to, have anybody experiment with that necessarily, So,
Well, so what's to say you don't push it a little further and take a amphetamine approach?
Well,
that's
that's a good question.
It's
I don't know if that will work or not. Again, of course, you're dealing with illegalities, right? So it would be interesting research to try that to see if something came of it. But that, as far as I know, hasn't been done. So.
Right. We need to get the studies back in Nazi Germany. I'm sure they've done this.
I wasn't aware the government was back in
You're
charge of
good.
legalities anyway, so they kind of do what they want,
Just an interesting thought. That would be.
No, but amphetamines are stimulants, so that seems like that could potentially.
It might.
Unless it
it might.
overstimulated, and you just kind of jump the shark with that.
That could be possible too. And we wouldn't know unless somebody actually does some empirical studies on it.
Right. Interesting.
You guys have any more questions for me?
I'm
That's
set.
interesting. I definitely curious about learning more about it.
Absolutely.
Who's the picture that you have behind you in your office?
That's Ingo Swann. He's the guy that actually came up with remote viewing in the first place.
Oh, okay.
He was doing some research with the American Society of Psychical Research, or the ASPR, in New York back in the late 60s, early 70s, and they were having him do some out-of-body experiments that he thought were kind of stupid. They were not set up well. He said, let's do it this way. And he came up with the first remote viewing protocol. And then they developed it from there. And he's actually essentially the seed for the whole remote viewing program. He and put off his experiment with tachyons, and he thought there might be some kind of a non-local kind of element to it in terms of, quantum entanglement or whatever. And he proposed an experiment to a mutual friend of his and Ingo's, but he didn't know Ingo. And Ingo said, why are you going to do it that way? What you need is someone who can psychically report on what the effect is. And Puthoff says, oh, that's crazy. But he decided to try it, and they had really success. And that experiment that they did, which I won't go into now, but that experiment that they did was quite successful, and it caught the CIA's attention. And that's when they came knocking on Puthoff's door. And in fact, what happened was, stereotypical dark suits, sunglasses, come up, knock on his office door at SRI. He opens the door, and they said, we're from the CIA. Did you write this? And they held up the report of the experiment.
Wow.
And he said, I didn't know whether to admit it or deny everything.
Run.
It's late at that point.
Yeah.
All right, we're going to jump into the 6 questions, and then we're going to cut you loose, Paul.
Okay.
Appreciate you coming.
All right. I actually wrote up a couple notes because if I was trying to answer these on the spot, I don't know if I'd succeed. So, all right.
I appreciate that. Number 1, you have the power to create one law. Which law do you create?
So this might outrage some reviewers, although given your clientele, maybe not. I would create a national concealed carry reciprocity law where anybody who is properly trained and had passed the proper background checks could carry a concealed weapon in any state.
Yeah, I think our viewers might like that.
Oh, yeah. The majority are going to like that.
Yeah. Everybody in this room.
Well, what a lot of people who are against that kind of thing don't understand, they're scared to death of concealed carry. They don't realize that people who have concealed carry permits are better behaved than even the police are. they get in trouble with a lot. Yeah. The other thing they don't realize is that there is a strong correlation between decrease in violent crime in an area that has concealed carry, legal concealed carry, as compared to areas that don't. So there's, it's a correlation. You can't prove the causality there, but the indication is that concealed carry at the very least doesn't cause more crime.
Exactly.
And it may actually help decrease crime. So
I completely agree. That's awesome.
yeah.
Are you going to be on the ballot in November? I'll vote for you.
No, sadly, no. We are in for a real mess, no matter who wins. I'm afraid.
Wow.
Yeah. This episode's going to air, I believe, 2 days before the election. So Everybody's
Okay.
gonna be tense when this is playing.
Yeah.
All right. Dang it. Okay.
Yeah, but I like that answer. That's good. One of the things I've always said is that you go to a gun show, any kind of gun show, there's guns everywhere, there's ammo everywhere,
Yeah.
all the vendors are carrying, and I've never personally heard of a shooting at a gun show. It's a mutual respect everywhere. It's like kind of the Wild West mentality. Everybody's equally carrying, so you're not going to have some nut jobs just shooting off.
Yeah. Well, if you do, it won't last long.
That's for sure.
It'll get corrected quickly.
Yeah.
Number 2, what 3 words would you choose to describe yourself?
So this is not my answer. This is my wife's answer.
I
I
love it.
consulted her on this. She
So we
said,
got the truth.
she
then,
said,
you're saying.
yes, she said, know it all.
Oh,
It's got to be true if it came from the wife.
that's right.
Yeah. Yeah. You know, I do tend to butt in and tell people stuff I know that I think will help them, whether they want that help or not. So anyway, okay. Yeah.
It's better than he knows nothing. So yeah. It's a good problem to have. Number 3,
Yeah.
what do you want to be remembered for?
I had a little consultation on this too, and I think my wife was helpful on this, but I agree. It's for I would like to be remembered for being honest and kind.
That's solid.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you know, it'd also be nice to be remembered for being a hotshot remote viewer, but you know,
Yeah.
we'll see.
I think that's already in the books.
Yeah. Well, I don't know about hotshot, but remote viewer, yes.
Number 4, what is something you like that most people don't know about you?
I'm a weather junkie.
Weather.
Weather junkie. I got to know what the weather is, even if it's not in my backyard. I'm fascinated by, you know, hurricanes and tornadoes and tsunamis. Well, that's not weather, but you know, typhoons, and I'm interested to see how things are changing in the weather around the world. So, but you know, most particularly stuff that might affect me, but still, it doesn't have to be.
That's your favorite show, the weather.
It can
The
be,
Weather
yes. It can be, yes.
What's your favorite source for weather? Do you go to the Weather Channel or you have apps or?
When you know, usually the downside of it is that I don't have a lot of time to follow it these days. But when I do, I absolutely have to see the national weather in the evening news and the local weather, and sometimes even 3 broadcasts of the local weather, because each one is a little bit different, right? When I do have time, I'll dip into the Weather Channel, and I do have an app on my computer and stuff that I look into. And
What app
I've
do you
got a whole
like?
bunch of places bookmarked that I go and look, and one of them is actually Wyoming. So
What app do you like to use?
I wish I knew the name of it.
They're not a sponsor, so you don't have to say it.
There you go.
I'm just curious. I'm always looking for a good weather app.
I actually mostly use it on my tablet, and I'm not sure what it's called. I just use it. I can't remember. You know, when I loaded it on 4 or 5 years ago, I knew what it was, but I haven't considered what it's called since, you know.
Now it's just the weather.
Yeah.
Do you, this is kind of a side subject, but do you have theories or anything with weather, with HARP or anything like that? Or is your interest?
No, I've researched the HARP because a lot of my friends are in your demographic. They're conspiracy theorists, and they're really hot on the HARP thing, and I've looked into it, and I'm not convinced there's a weather connection there.
Really? That's interesting.
Yeah, I'm not convinced. But you know, I'm not ruling it out either. It's the problem with weather. It's so stochastic. It's so chaotic, right? It's based on off of chaos theory, that it would seem really hard to control, even if you did have a mechanism to control it, right? So I think you might be able. Well, obviously we can control it in terms of like silver iodide. I mean, that's a form of weather control, a very primitive one, but nonetheless. But if you could, you know, input energy into the atmosphere of a certain kind, I would think there would be more larger effects than refined effects, right? So you might be able to maybe augment a hurricane, but you may not be able to start one, you know, or maybe you could start one, but you could not. I don't know, you know. So and right now, of course, it's speculation. We don't have smoking guns on it, so I can't rule it out. But I also have some skepticism about it. So
I think Mother Nature is Mother Nature, and she's going to do what she wants to do.
Well, yes. We may tinker a little, but we're not going to win in the end.
Yeah.
Number 5, if you could have any superpower, which is kind of strange asking a remote viewer,
Yeah.
which would you choose? You can
So
have
since we've already got that one taken care of,
superpower.
no, I thought about this, and what I think is I'd love to be able to cause time to slow down
Mm.
while being able to maintain my normal rate.
Ooh,
Okay.
it's gonna be a first.
Because think
Definitely.
about that. Most people want to be able to speed up time or whatever, right? Slowing it down while maintaining your rate, normal speed would be really useful for a number of reasons.
Mm.
For me, mainly, I could get a whole lot more done in one day. Right?
Yeah.
So I think that would be awesome. So,
Well, let me ask you this: are you slowing down time, or are you moving really fast?
Ooh, nice spin.
well, of course, that is the question. The perspective wise, I think that from an absolute perspective, it would be slowing time down. From the local perspective, it would look either way would look the same.
Right,
Right.
right.
So everyone
But
around
if you had an absolute,
would see you as normal time, but you would be on a different.
Yeah, so we would see
well,
you
no,
going
if you're
fast,
slowing
you'd be
down
very
time,
slow.
everybody's, yeah, they'd see you
Yeah.
as going really fast. See, now from physics perspective, there's an advantage to going normal time with time slowing down. If you're going in normal time, going faster, then you got to worry about atmospheric friction. You got to worry about a lot of different variables and stuff that you don't have to worry about if you're normal and time is slower. So
Smart man talking.
Yeah, you thought that one through. Yeah.
I like that.
That's a mixed martial art fighter's dream right there. Throw a punch.
yeah,
And keep going.
that's for sure. Yeah.
All right, last question. Number 6. If you could know the absolute truth on one conspiracy theory, which would you choose and why?
So this is a toss-up between what's going on at Area 51, or at least what has been going on at Area 51, and the JFK assassination. And I think JFK tipped it. And the reason that, I think a lot of the current real popular conspiracy theories are just not tenable. Most of the 9/11 stuff just doesn't make any sense to me, the conspiracy theories surrounding it. But
I'm gonna
JFK
edit that part out.
has, yeah, I know, that'll make lots of your listeners annoyed, but whatever, right? Trust me, I have tons of friends who get mad at me all the time when I say that, right? So anyway, the JFK thing though is truly an enigma here, because there's enough stuff known about it that we can be pretty confident that Oswald did it. What we don't know is why he did and who put him up to it. And there's the provocative circumstantial evidence that could have been the Russians, that it could have been the mob, that it could have been the Cubans. It could have been any of those. And there's sufficiently weird features about that whole thing that the Warren Commission report seems pretty flawed and seems in many respects implausible. So, I mean, if we could get to the bottom of it, we might find out that it really was all it looked like on the surface. Or maybe we find out there's more, we find out what the bottom line really was. That would be interesting.
So you think Oswald did actually pull the trigger?
Oh yeah. Well, let's put it this way. I haven't seen any good, really strong reasons to doubt that he did. Let's put it that way.
I thought
And
that,
I think that the fact that, well, then one other thing, and I think the fact that Jack Ruby took him out, although you can interpret it in a different way, is evidence that he did it and they didn't want him to spill any beans about what. I can't figure out how Ruby got into this, frankly, but nonetheless, I think that they wanted him shut up. I think is my current working
sure.
hypothesis about that. Huh?
for
Say
sure,
again?
whether he was a patsy or whether he did it, he needed to not
Yeah.
talk.
Yeah.
So-
So I think there's real reason to suspect a true conspiracy in the JFK thing. Whether it really is or not, well, we don't know that. But that would be very interesting to get to the true
Mhm.
bottom smoking gun on that one.
I think it's clearly something was going on. If not, the military-industrial complex wanted to shut him down, and all the other stuff you said too. But I thought they had done some experiments, testing, and that proved that it was virtually impossible for somebody to get off that many shots with that rifle, with that accuracy, blah blah blah.
Well, yeah, it was that was interesting. So that was a 6.5 Carcano, I forget the other name for it, right? So it's bolt action,
Mhm.
but it was a pretty, I mean, so you take the Lee Enfield, right? That's famous for being able to get off 10 shots in a matter of seconds. It's a bolt action rifle. So it's possible that he did that. The question is, how well could you aim under those circumstances, right? Trying to work the bolt as fast as you can. And I'd say there's some unknowns there. I would say
Yeah,
that it's
right.
not conclusive.
His
one way or the
skill,
other.
it's a moving target. I mean, I know some snipers have done some pretty amazing work with that, but again,
Yeah.
it's the, like you just said, the accuracy of moving target, and then
Yeah.
of course Oswald, whether he possessed that skill, the ability or not, Interesting.
And with him dead, you can't, well, I don't suppose anybody would hand him a rifle and say, replicate that if he
Yeah.
was still alive, but it would be interesting to see if he could, because in fact, if he could have done that, that would have answered a whole lot of questions that we have
True.
today still, because he's not around to test that. So,
Yeah.
and my wife actually used to work for Jack Anderson. You remember who Jack Anderson was? The investigative journalist,
Attorney?
Washington Post.
Huh?
No. He was really the dean of the American Investigative Journalism Corps from roughly about the mid '60s up until the mid '90s, and she was his managing editor. Jack actually wrote a fair amount about the Kennedy assassination, and his conviction, I hope I'm saying this right, his belief was Castro getting even for plots on Castro. My wife would be able to tell me if I was wrong. The mob, I can't remember whether it was the mob he thought did it or Castro did, but I'm pretty sure it was Castro that he believed did it. And there's reasons to support that theory.
Well,
there's
absolutely.
reasons for
Yeah,
it.
Castro could not have been real happy with what they were doing. And then
Yeah.
the ties to the mob, and then things I heard where Kennedy wanted to get out of Vietnam, so that would have ticked off the military-industrial complex, which was just
Yeah.
having truckloads of money, So it seems like they could have had a little short meeting with about a half a dozen people who wanted to get rid of him.
Well, I have to say, I think the least likely suspect is military industrial.
Really?
Yeah, because rumors of Kennedy launched the Bay of Pigs invasion, right?
Yeah.
Kennedy actually got us into Vietnam in the first place. So I really don't think, even if you assume that the military would want to create a war in which they, somehow or other profit from, which back then may be more likely than it is today. But nonetheless, I don't think there was enough motivation for something like that for the military to do.
Didn't he want to get us out of the war?
Huh?
Wasn't he in the process of getting us out at the time?
Not seriously, I don't think. Now, again,
okay.
This is all stuff I read years ago, but
Yeah,
he
same
was
here.
the guy that he first got. He was the one that sent advisors in, right?
Okay.
And they had contingency plans to continue to build up. So if he was working to get us out, that was a sudden change of heart for him.
Oh, okay. Well, maybe I need to reread that. Yeah, I've been a long time since I've read it as well. So.
Yeah, but the mob had really good reasons, and the Cubans had really good reasons, and of course Russia. That was the time of Khrushchev, and Khrushchev was mad at everybody.
And a lot of husbands had reasons,
Yeah, that's
Kennedy
true.
might have had
That's
reasons.
true. Actually, my final military assignment was chief of intelligence security for the military district of Washington. So the White House and all the district was, there we go, banging my mic around, right? Although the White House security was only a kind of a distant responsibility for me, it would be in times of, if they had to declare martial law or something, and then they would get the old guard in there, the military or the infantry, that's not a brigade, the infantry regiment that's there. So I got a tour of the White House. I got to go down in all the secret passage and all that stuff, and I saw the door where Marilyn Monroe was smuggled in. So
Whoa.
it was interesting. It was interesting. Yeah.
That is neat.
Well, where can we find you and support you? Are everybody listening? Huh?
Was that the last question?
Yeah, that was the last one.
Oh, okay.
6 questions, Paul. You know the.
Man, I'm just into the question. I just was rolling. I thought you had another one.
P-Hud's been a guest on the show a couple of times. He knows the deal.
Yeah.
So where can we find you and support you? What links can you provide, and plug that book again?
So My main website is rviewer.com. That's the letter R and the word viewer together. So rviewer.com. And you can find everything from there, but it's a pretty big website, so it may take you a little hunting. Probably the first place you ought to go is just to up at the top. There's a tab that says RV in depth, and there's a whole bunch of background information there on remote viewing, and that kind of links to a lot of the other stuff that's there. But explore around. I think you'll find some interesting things there. I do recommend my book, The Essential Guide to Remote Viewing, for those of you who just getting started in it, because it covers skeptical arguments. It covers how to do it at a very basic level. It covers history of it. It shows some of the really cool military remote viewing projects we did. And, you know, it's just generally an introductory work for people who want to know more without it being weird. I don't talk about aliens or UFOs in there, or that kind of stuff. It's just a down and dirty, straightforward remote viewing introduction. So
Show us the book again.
you want to see it again? Yeah.
Flash that bad boy.
Essential Guide to Remote Viewing. You can get it on Amazon. Is that clear? It looks
Yep.
clear. Yeah. You can get it on Amazon. If you want a signed copy, you can get it off of the book's website, which is guide-to-remote-viewing.com.
Very
Just
nice.
literally all run together, guide-to-remote-viewing.com. So there's lots of other stuff I could tell you, but I don't want to overwhelm folks with.
Yeah, I'll get all the good links from you too, so we'll post it up in the
Yeah.
show notes. P-Hud, you had something going on as well that you were going to plug with your beef jerky.
Oh yeah. So I have a little side business, P-Hud's Jerky, and you can find it on Facebook and Instagram. But a very good friend of mine's friend is doing a support the stockings for the troops. And so she's putting together stockings for the troops, all the different little items in there. And so I decided that P-Hud's Jerky was going to put together 500 packs of jerky to go in to the troops. So if you're interested in helping with that, you can reach out to me on Facebook or Instagram at P-Hud's Jerky or phudsjerky@gmail.com if you want to help support that.
Tell me, people, I'll tell you, they'll love that. They'll love that. You know, when I was over to Desert Storm, we got a lot of care packages, and we really appreciate them. But people often send us stuff that we didn't need. Like we had 1 million toothbrushes and 1 million tubes of toothpaste. Jerky would have been awesome.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah,
good to
I mean,
hear.
if I get a lot of support, then I'll try to push it. She's going to do about 1,600 stockings this year, and it's just a little too late in the game for me, and also just financially. So if I get a lot of support, then maybe I can go more than 500. But that's kind of my goal right now, is to hit 500 stockings, 500 packs of jerky to go into the stockings.
Perfect. You heard it, viewers. Get out there and support your peoples.
Yeah, if you're listening or watching this podcast, you heard what to do. Go
Yeah.
support the troops.
You can find us on YouTube.
Yeah, go support us on YouTube. Our channel is pretty new, so a lot of people that listen regularly don't even realize we have a YouTube channel. But it's Truth or Theory podcast on YouTube. Subscribe, share it with your friends. And JP and I are on Instagram at TOTJP and at RealEWillie.
Yeah.
And you can get behind the scenes information on what guests are coming on and other good stuff, merchandise stuff as well. Mr. Paul, thank you so much for joining us tonight. It's been a lot of fun and very informative, so we really appreciate you coming on.
Well, thanks for inviting me on. And anytime you need more comic relief, let me know. I'll come on.
Definitely. We'd love to have you back on sometime.
You bet.
Have a good one. Stay safe.
Thank you. You too.